Hi, this is Justin Coletti of Sonic Scoop. Thanks for joining me for some more MixCon. And today we've got a MixCon panel moderated by Sonic Scoop co-founder David Weiss, and it is all about remote audio and music production, whether you're recording, mixing, producing in a remote way. Important topic in today's day and age, right? He's got three tremendous panelists on. This one's brought to you by B&H. In case you don't know, B&H are sponsors of MixCon, and they got tons of great deals with some big deals on microphones, cables, all sorts of other stuff with the special discount code MixCon20. Check it out in the show notes down below. We'll link you to all the special MixCon deals they're doing. On this panel, we've got Kerry Pompeo, great recording engineer, mix engineer. She's worked with the likes of Elvis Costello and Michael Stipe. We've got another great recording engineer and producer, a guy named Scott Jacoby, who's worked with the likes of Coldplay, Janelle Monáe. He's worked with John Legend, Jason Mraz, Ronnie Spector, Vampire Weekend, really too many to count. And we also have on someone from the retail side about advising you on purchasing decisions around remote recording and remote production. That's DanBallas of B&H. Remember to hit like and subscribe down below and tell us your stories of working remotely during times of quarantine. All right, enjoy the panel and make sure you check out those special deals from B&H linked down below. David, take it away.
Hello, this is David Weiss of SonicScoop.com. Thank you for joining us at MixCon 2020. Our panel today is Optimizing Your Studio for Remote Audio Production is made possible by our sponsor, the audio, photo, and video retailer B&H. I like how B&H puts it on their website where they say they are, quote, not a big box store or a faceless chain or a personality-free zone. B&H is a group of people who are passionate about the things you're passionate about, from photography, film, music, and audio to art and technology, creating and imagining. B&H is now available to anyone worldwide via their website at bhphotovideo.com. However, as a New York City resident, I can attest to the truth of that statement from personal experience. Shopping at their Manhattan flagship store is pretty much a rite of passage for any audio professional in NYC, and I've always gotten great service and prices there. In fact, I bought my very first microphone, a Shure SM57, of course, at B&H, and I still remember that formative experience. They've helped us to assemble today's panel to bring the Sonic Scoop community up to date on an incredibly important topic, remote audio production. Whether you're producing music, podcasts, voiceovers, audio post, streaming media, and more, the current pandemic has made mastery of remote audio production techniques absolutely vital. Put simply, the more comfortable you, your clients, and collaborators are with working remotely, the more creative you can get, and the more you can help your career. Let's meet our panelists. DanBallas. Dan, say hi.
Hi, I'm Dan.
Hey, Dan. DanBallas has been working in audio for the last 10 years. After graduating from Shenandoah Conservatory in Virginia, he spent some time interning and working at studios around Nashville, the DC area, and now in NYC. A musician for most of his life, Dan is no stranger to performing and plays trumpet and guitar. As a pro audio sales specialist at B&H, he works with customers from all over the world to solve their audio needs, from podcasting and home recording to live sound and commercial install. When not at B&H, Dan is a freelance mixing engineer and horror podcaster. Dan, we'll have to talk later about our shared love of horror films.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. You can connect with him and his teammates at danielba@bhphotovideo.com. That's Daniel Boy Alpha at bhphotovideo.com. Now, let's move on to Scott Jacoby. Scott, where are you?
Hey, everyone. Good to see you. Hey, David. And hey, rest of everyone. And I'm at my video.
That's right. Yes, which is also here in Manhattan, right?
There's no doubt.
All right.
Yeah.
I have been to that studio and I savored every second of it. Scott Jacoby is a Grammy award-winning writer, producer, engineer, mixer, musician, and recording artist. His work, spanning virtually every genre of music, has garnered awards, graced platinum-selling albums, and topped charts throughout the world. His collaborators include John Legend, Coldplay, Rachel Platten, Vampire Weekend, Sia, Jason Mraz, Janelle Monáe, Pink, Ronnie Spector, and many more. He's also an acclaimed film composer, the founder president of Usonia Records, that's EUSONIA Records, the owner of Usonia Studios in Manhattan, and the CEO of his production company, Skojak Music Productions. Approach closely to Jacoby at skojak.com. That's SCOJAC.com. There's a lot more to Scott, but we just don't have time. Lastly, Kerry Pompeo is a NYC-based recording engineer and producer, also a longtime friend of mine, who describes her role in the studio as, quote, being the liaison between artist and machine. Since 2004, Kerry has been harnessing audio for studio, stage, and screen with a diverse array of artists and genres. As house engineer for Concord Music's NY studio, she worked with Elvis Costello, Jacob Collier, Michael Stipe, Esperanza Spaulding, Jazzmeia Horn, Teddy Sinclair, Injury Reserve, Oynx Collective, and hosted hundreds of writing sessions. Many independent artists of all genres have sought her out for her unique approach and creative studio techniques. Come to Kerry at kerrypompeo.com. That's KERRYPOMPEO.com. All right. Is everybody ready?
Ready.
Good.
All right. Let's dive in. So, all right. My first question is, it may sound obvious, but what is different about collaborating remotely on audio production rather than being together in the same place to record or mix?
I mean, in my opinion, first, you know, when you collaborate with people just in general, a lot of it's about sort of the vibe that you get between people and connecting and everything, which of course is way more difficult when you're doing it remotely via looking at a computer screen. Sometimes the video isn't perfect, audio isn't perfect. So I think that's one big difference and big hurdle to overcome as well. Right, exactly. Scott, what would you add to that?
You know, I my feelings about it are almost identical to Dan's. I think that the vibe factor is something that's you know, alarmingly absent from the Zoom calls and the other type of video calls, and so you do your best to make up for that. There's been some interesting articles, you know, written about sort of the interpersonal reaction and the psychology of a Zoom call. It's just so different because you're not seeing, you know, because it's slightly not a perfectly fluid image. You're not seeing little micro expressions, and it's just a whole other thing that you're not picking up on. And so you do your best to overcome. And you know, it's look, put another way, it's better than not doing what we do. So it's not bad.
True. Yeah. And on the flip side, like, we are fortunate that we even have things like Zoom or other things like that as an option to us now in this time. Like, I try and imagine, like, what if we've been going through this 15 years ago, for example, or even 10 years ago.
Totally.
We would have had a lot fewer options, but absolutely, the vibe just has got to change, like, in this instance. Kerry, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, totally agreeable. The vibe, you know, just like the timing, you know, when we're overdubbing things, you know, when we're recording live in a studio, people are using like their sight lines, and, you know, they're not always just listening to a click, but now we're forced to overdub and like listen to a click instead of, like, you know, a drummer communicating with somebody else. And, you know, just like those little nuances, you know, we really get lost when we're just overdubbing.
Yeah, exactly. When you were working on songwriting sessions, I can imagine that you experienced a lot of magic moments, right?
Exactly. You know, and happy accidents. And, you know, when we're kind of like just using, you know, we're kind of like using creative bricks and just layering them on top of each other. You know, there's no room for, you know, like those happy accidents or, you know, just diversions to happen. So
yeah,
it's definitely, missing that part.
It's
right.
another thing too related to this and just interacting is like, for technical reasons too, and I don't know what the specifics are, but when you're having a conversation with someone, either during a writing session or production or things like that, over video conference, what you can't do in the same way as when you're live is kind of talk over each other in a nice way or overlap, so right. There's that issue, which you might think of as a subtle technical thing, but it's not. It completely dictates the interaction between two people, and it becomes more, when we're on these calls, it's more of like, okay, I speak and then you speak. And when you think of all the things that a writing session should be, right, where there's kind of like multiple audio things going on of somebody playing an instrument and someone talking and then someone responding to that or singing at the same time, not to mention latency, there's difficulty. And so, we got to do our best to work our way around it. And what I like to do too is just acknowledge some of these realities to the people, just so that it puts that out of the conversation. No one's worried about it. We're all doing the best we can.
Right. Yeah, Scott, I think that's a great point. So you're saying that you communicate to all the participants in advance that this is going to be a part of it, right? And you feel like that prepares everybody. And what has the effect been? Does that in fact smooth communication and collaboration?
It hasn't, in my experience, because I think, like, just in general, the way we're programmed as human beings, if you sort of get some awkward things out of the way before endeavoring upon them, I think it gives everyone a greater comfort level. And then, all of these sort of things that we're trying to overcome, they're not as big, because we're all like, okay, we know it's been established. So it's basically just sort of addressing it. And I've tended to do that, and I think it's worked pretty well.
Got it. So, well, we've been talking a lot about, I asked about what's different about collaborating remotely. We've hit on a lot of like the traps and negative aspects of it, but there are also opportunities, correct? What has opened up to content creators, music producers, audio professionals now that there is more remote collaboration?
I feel like kind of two things. One would be location is no longer an issue at all. I mean, you can collaborate with somebody from New York to LA, and there's no difference between down the block if, New York to New York, if you're doing it remotely anyways. And then another thing to me is cost. Because a lot of times you would book studio time or something and get everyone in the same room. And of course, each person individually needs to have their own setup. So I guess it's sort of an individual cost, but you not necessarily have to book a big studio or anything like that. So there's the potential for lower cost anyways. Not always, but could be. Right. Yeah, those are great points. Kerry, what do you think? I know that you hopped right on remote production and remote mixing. How do you see it opening up?
Sure. Well, a lot of what I had been doing, at the start of COVID was going to my clients. We normally we'd work in the studio together and setting them up, consulting for them, and setting them up with home studios. So again, it's more cost effective for them. But again, like, I worry because when things open back up and all my clients have their studios, where does that leave that? So it's a changing landscape, but yeah.
Right. That's true. It's kind of a two-sided coin. If you start to specialize in remote audio production, we don't know how long this situation is going to last, and how permanent or temporary it is. But what I like to say about everything right now, people are always like, well, when we return to normal, ... But to me, now is normal. Like, whatever you're experiencing now is normal. I think people are, someone else put it well, is that what they're looking for is a return to the familiar. But we're just going to have to keep moving forward. And again, that's part of what this panel is about, is adapting right now to what's going on. So then the next question I wanted to ask is, how has remote audio production evolved in the past year? And how did the COVID pandemic accelerate these changes? Dan? Oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, I think, in the phrasing of that question, David, like the word accelerate is really how I think of this whole thing, right? We were on these paths for the last 20 years, in a sense. Like, Phil Ramone, for example, had this concept of the ISDN line and sort of doing remote sessions in LA and New York. And, we're at a point technologically where that's a lot easier to do now. And it's just become part of how we work. And the acceleration part is like, we were already going down that road, and now we're going down there a hell of a lot sooner, which, has goods and bads. But I think first of all, everyone's in the same boat. All of us are in the same boat. And so we've had to figure out ways to do things and to get there faster. And so if someone, was contemplating remote sessions at some point or some part of their workflow, now they're faced with the reality, like, I've got to do this. And not just for mixing, for example, but for these other parts of the song making process. And so, I think that we're fortunate in a sense that both the bandwidth and the technology is there for the most part to make this pretty decent experience. And, my take on it is just what I try to do in my own workflow, and incorporating these technologies to a high degree in my work now is to whatever extent I can replicate the feeling and the interaction and the aspects of doing something in person, And so for me, in a concrete sense, what that looks like is, a laptop that is doing what we're doing right now, where there's a type of video conference call, and that's where you're kind of like interacting. And then through a whole host of other things, you're getting the other pieces of the puzzle where person's able to, with very little latency, basically listen to what you're doing. It could work in both directions. It depends on what type of session, you're doing, if you're tracking something, if you're mixing something, and where the source material is. But between having the sort of the audio experience of hearing someone's voice in real time and interacting, and then seeing the video, and then hearing the audio, and then in many cases sharing the screen, which is something, again, in replicating the actual experience. If I'm working with someone here at my studio, they're looking at the screen, and so much of like work these days, unfortunately, like involves looking at stuff too. So people like to kind of like look at the plugin while you're messing with it and that sort of thing. And then, for me too, I'll just mention, I have incorporated, because David, you and I have spoken about this and I've written about it before, but I've incorporated since one more layer of technology on top of that, which is the remote desktop aspect. And so in this way, my assistant, wherever he might be in the world, can be kind of like literally doing aspects of the engineering or tracking while I'm doing other stuff. So I could be, if we're tracking a vocal, for example, remotely, then he could be running Pro Tools, and I could just be focused on kind of taking notes and listening to performances. So there's a whole bunch of ways, and that to me has been a really new, cool layer of this whole thing.
That's great, Scott. And in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to share more about your approach that you wrote about for Sonic Scoop, which I really love, because I think you applied like what I'd call some low tech thinking and plugged it into a high tech solution, kind of a hybrid thing. Yeah. And so, Kerry or Dan, anything you want to add on that topic?
I mean, for me, I like Scott had said, like, I think the acceleration is the perfect word. I mean, we were on the trajectory, and it just happened a lot quicker. And, recently, even Zoom just announced that they're doing a professional music mode. So they're bumping the sample rate up from, I think, 22 kilohertz up to 48, I believe. So things are starting to get better and quicker, and security as well with it too. As a lot of people have heard, at the beginning when everyone jumped onto Zoom, it wasn't always the most secure. So that's something that we don't think about too often too. And, that has accelerated, and everything has just happened quicker because of COVID, I think.
Yep. Yes, that's true. Yeah, certainly something that I heard about a lot in online education. People who are involved in online education, that they're like, everything that they're working with now, they've told me this was coming, and now it's just happened a lot faster. Right. Kerry, anything you want to add?
I just think that necessity is the mother of invention. So I'm just, curious to see what is going to come out of this. And, I think that there's definitely, I think that some of the answers might lie in like the gaming space and those kinds of like processing engines, because these are, they process huge amounts of information. And I think that there's some sort of connection that we can like leap to.
That's
a really
in the
good
future.
Point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, looking to other industries
just to bridge the gap. Yeah.
Yeah, for examples of how they may have been doing it and how they are doing it. So Dan, can you walk us through the questions that you ask people when they're setting up a remote recording situation? How do their answers start to lead you to an optimized set of solutions for their needs? Let's talk about how people can get set up if they're watching this and they don't know where to start, and how you work with people like that.
Sure. So I think the first question that I ask is, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we using this equipment for? Is it for music recording? Is it for podcasting? Are you a filmmaker and you need to add audio to your setup? If it is for music, are you recording voice or instruments, or kind of trying to piece together what exactly the equipment is going to be used for and what we need to get out of it? That's going to help determine our microphone choice, any acoustic treatment we might need, which I'll talk about in a minute too, any other peripheral equipment, stands, stuff like that. Even little things like a desktop stand versus a floor standing mic stand. That's little things that can make the process a lot smoother later on. Then I kind of get into location, like where are you located? Where are you recording? If you have a dedicated room that's meant to be a studio, that is going to sound different, or we have the potential to make it sound different than your bedroom, and where you are also living your normal life in. So, and also if you live out in the suburbs or something, that's different than living in Midtown Manhattan, where there's a ton of sounds, cars honking and everything. So that also affects mic choice. A condenser mic is going to be more sensitive. You're going to get more of the background noise. Dynamic mics are less sensitive, less background noise. Kind of get into a little bit of that. And then I also kind of get into, are we upgrading existing equipment or are we starting from scratch? Because also I don't want to recommend something that you already have. And if you have a condenser microphone and it's picking up too much sound, that tells me, okay, let's not go that route and let's go a different route. So upgrading or starting fresh, excuse me, or also budget is a big one too. Unfortunately, budget is just a fact of life, and that can determine, okay, are we going for an interface plus microphone kind of set, or are we going to be doing like a USB microphone, which is quicker, easier, more cost efficient, but kind of caps out at a certain quality. So I think all of these, and depending on the answers that I get from the customer, those influence my next questions. And then we kind of dive into more specifics. How are you going to physically set everything up? Like, where are you going to place the microphones, that kind of stuff. But those are probably the 3 or 4 basic questions that I start to ask to get a good idea of what's going on.
Right. Do you find that those conversations sometimes go into some surprising directions, both for you and for them, and lead to some discoveries?
They can, absolutely. And, one of the surprising things, one way or another, is cost as well. Because sometimes people come in thinking they can spend $50, and really what they want and what they need to get what they want is $200. Or sometimes vice versa. I'll have somebody come in and want to buy a $1,000 microphone. And after talking to them, I'm like, hey, you can buy it, but it's not going to solve your issue. So this actually $400 setup is actually going to get you a better quality sound than this $1,000 setup. And sometimes, the customer is surprised, one way or another, good or bad, depending on price and everything. But, that's the surprises do come up for sure.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Scott and Kerry, that makes me want to ask you if there's anything specifically that you've added to your studios recently, either in terms of hardware or software, that have been specifically for remote audio production purposes.
Sure. Well, one of the first things that I got was the fader port 16, which is just 16 fader controller, because I used to work with a much larger controller, and my home studio was basically just for editing and completely being in the box. So mixing, I just have to have that tactile feel, and I like writing automation, so having at least 16 faders at my fingertips was like a big thing that I needed to have.
Great. That's interesting. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And because to me that's not that just isn't like the thing I would have thought of. Like, I was thinking you were going to talk, I don't know, just about some other type of ergonomic addition, but that makes a lot of sense. How about you, Scott?
Well, I'd say the biggest game changer for me was that piece of software, made by Audio Movers called Listen To. And that from the day I heard about that, and then it would happen to be the same day that I got it, I was just like, well, this completely changes everything for me with regard to remote everything. And so essentially what it is software that you would sort of, whichever DAW, it's DAW agnostic. It works on basically all of the leading DAWs, and you would put, in essence, a plug-in, say as the last insert on your master fader, and essentially what it does is it creates a link that you'd send to whomever you need to listen, and then with nothing but an internet connection and a browser, a person anywhere on their phone or on their laptop, in their car, whatever, can be listening in high res with like less than a half a second latency to what you're doing in real time. And just if you think about that for a minute, for those of you who aren't aware of the software, if you're a mixer, for example, it's a complete game changer in a day, because like wherever your artist is or client, they can be listening to stuff. And when you think of the revision process, this gets rid of so many back and forth steps. It's incredible. Like, they can be listening in real time. They're like, hey, like the vocal on the second verse can kind of come up on that first phrase, and you're like, okay, how's this? And they're listening, and without like printing a full mix and then sending it and getting their feedback, they're like, yeah, that sounds great. Or like, can you bump it 1 dB more? So, I mean, that I'd sort of point that out as just the absolute centerpiece of how I've been doing stuff. And, whereas it's very obvious how that can be of tremendous assistance in the mix process, I've also found just, in doing tracking sessions, whether it's at my studio when we're tracking here and that needs to go elsewhere, or in more cases than not, I'm producing something on Zoom, and the guitarist that I'm working with, I have them get this software, or either the demo of it, or you can get it like for $4 for a week, for example, and then they just have it. And in their DAW, I'm listening at my studio or on the speakers in high res to the thing. And again, the whole goal is to making this be as close as possible to the experience of what it would be in normal times, and how we have done things in the past. So that's been a great thing. Other than that, but I've found that just like having the laptop as a sidecar is just been great for any number of reasons, but mostly for the Zoom thing. So all of the new kind of like stuff that I kind of have gotten or made work during this has all been in the software and sort of like computery realm rather than, you know, hardware per se.
Right. I got it. And for those of you who want to know more, what Scott is referring to can be found at audiomovers.com to check out, listen to, and you mentioned that in your article as well. It sounds like that was a really holy moly moment for you, right, Scott, when you were able to find out about that and start using it?
It was, and I you know, a thank you to like the Pure Mix folks, because I was doing a webcast for them and with Jason Mraz and the producer of the album, and they that's what they use, you know, and I didn't know of it, and so when we downloaded the demo, that was the day I bought it. I was just like, this is fantastic.
Nice. I love when that happens, no matter what it is. Scott, I think you've touched on something though that I think is extremely important that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with hardware or software, which is the collaborative learning aspect of what can happen when we continue to work together and work remotely. Like, it sounds like the more opportunities that we seek out right now to work remotely, the more chance we have about learning of a solution that one of our collaborators is using. It's almost like it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy that the more you do this, the better you're going to get. I would just encourage everyone who's watching this to seek out remote collaboration as soon as possible. Get yourself minimally equipped, whatever you consider to be your MVP, your minimum viable product, and get it going. And then find out what your other collaborators are doing to smooth out their workflow. Ask them, say, hey, how did you do that? And I love the way that paid off for you, Scott. Kerry, you wrote an article for Sonic Scoop about remote mixing, virtual mixing. There was a huge hit for us. And I think you made a lot of points that talk about the aspect of it that doesn't necessarily include like how good things sound or how we're being creatively, but about workflows. What are some of the recommendations, the key recommendations you can make to people when we're talking about file transfer and that type of thing that will speed things up, make things more efficient, and ultimately add to the creativity?
Sure. Well, I think some specifics would be just to, give the mixer options, because, the clients or the artists are recording in unconventional spaces. We want to have, just more to work with, in case, the sound isn't optimal for like a mix. Like, for instance, making sure we have a DI when there's a guitar or MIDI if you're recording virtual instruments. And just kind of like keeping things neat. So when I get things, if I'm mixing it, I shouldn't have to be editing and comping vocals and that sort of thing. I think, just kind of delivering things that are just in a more organized way, you're going to get more out of your mixer. Or just, just they have to think that editing is a separate step from mixing.
Yeah, exactly. So now, Kerry, on another note, you sent me some interesting photos the other day of B&B remote recording retreats, right? Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm kind of taking...
Airbnb, I should say. Are those
right.
happening now?
Yeah, well, I was just in Woodstock for a couple weeks, and I'm kind of taking remote recording, like literal, and going into like remote places with, my setup that's on wheels, and, just we all get COVID tests, and we kind of lock ourselves, in a place, that's far away where neighbors aren't going to complain, and so we can get to have that that human connection that we might have been like lacking.
Right. Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And that didn't really occur to me, but it's true. Like if you really want to get everybody together, you can. Yeah. You can all take a test. You can come to an agreement on what you consider safe, and you can still make it happen. I'm interested to know, what are the components that you have in your portable rig?
So I have an Apollo, an 8-channel Apollo. I have an Avalon 737, 2 610s, my fader port. I have, some decent microphones, or, for instance, when I went to Woodstock, we were actually working in a studio where the owner was away for a couple weeks. So we were able to have access to all of his microphones and gear. We just didn't use the board.
Right. Sounds like you got a tight setup.
Have wheels will travel.
Dan, if you were going to outfit someone with a remote package that they could move with, what are the type of questions that you would ask to try and get them closer to something like that?
Kind of going back to what I had said before, first question would be, what kind of things are we recording? If we are recording a drum set, all right, we need more preamps than just a single vocal. So that's going to sort of dictate the starting point. But of course, basics, you would need your interface, depending on the equipment and the answer to the what we're using it for, maybe separate preamps, outside of the interface. That budget also factors into that as well. Maybe like a separate compressor, and then, sort of the non-sexy stuff, I guess, like a rack, a good quality rack that you can, carry with you, power conditioner, because wherever you're going might not have good, clean power.
Yes, power is like always an issue.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Those are kind of the basics. Headphone amplifier, if it's for multiple people, you need it. Short cables too, because I hate putting a rack together and having 3-foot, 6-foot cables when I only need a foot. And then also just some of the little things, like make sure you got screwdrivers and just, all the little cable ties and the little random accessories that you might need at a pinch.
Sure. Right. And probably, and for better or for worse, there's probably no shortcuts to getting properly equipped for that, except to go ahead and do it and discover the thing that you really needed that unfortunately you don't have, but you'll have for next time.
Yeah, it's trial and error. I in fact, now I even bring like my soldering iron and stuff, because I never know. I've had to like make cables on the fly, or and I also bring things like that add to the vibe, like lighting and little electric candles so we don't burn down the Airbnb, and things like that, that just kind of, and I get there like usually a day before the band does, so everything's like set up and working, and they just have to like come in and, and it's exciting for them because, a lot of the times they haven't worked together, for a few months. Yeah. So it's a bit of a reunion, and cool stuff.
Right. It sounds like, based on that some music with some real extra juice could actually be created. Like, and I think that talks to the opportunities that we were discussing here. Like, what are the things what are maybe the positive sides of what's happening? And I can imagine how some real inspiration could come from everyone getting back together. So Scott, now I want to circle back to, also, you wrote an article that also was a big hit for us earlier this summer, and I think really opened some people's eyes about a different way of thinking about remote production. It involved audio movers that you were talking about. Can you describe again this process that you used with some of your clients?
Sure. And I mean, what this sort of like sprung out of, that article was, I was going through the same thing that all of us were going through at that time, which is just like, okay, well, I'm trying to kind of get through my workload, and I'm hitting an impasse. And for me, that impasse, as I described in the article, is basically like, songwriting you can do remotely. It's not great for all the reasons we mentioned, sort of lack of vibe, so on and so forth. Mixing lends itself very well to remote I think that of all of the parts of the process, that works really well. The big chunk in the middle of production and tracking was where I found the impasse. And so there are a number of obstacles there. One was, the inability to kind of produce, let's say you're cutting a vocal, for example, which is, as we all know, like one of the most important things, if not in the process, is getting good vocal performance, where the sort of the coaching of the vocal and getting the best performance really, really matters. And so, if you're sort of saying to a singer, let's assume that he or she has her own rig, and you say, hey, go do vocals and send me some tracks and I'll comp it. That's not the same thing as producing a vocal, and sort of being there with the person. So, for me, the combination of Zoom and audio movers allowed for the producing of a vocal, or for that matter, this could be applied to a guitar or a bass or any kind of session where you're kind of talking to someone. It's not like, hey, kind of do a thing and then send me the stuff. No, that's not going to work for a lot of producers. The second part of this was the almost a quality control issue of what kind of rig is the person recording on if he or she has their own thing. And like, if we're used to, at my studio, having a certain chain and a certain sort of quality of the components of a microphone and a preamp and cables and compressors and converters and that sort of thing, that, you have no idea what someone's working on. It's probably not what you have at the studio. And the quality of the vocals, depending on what you're doing, it's quite important. So the thing that I did, and which is, you may have been referring to that before as sort of the low tech part, was that, I decided that the best way that I could overcome this thing, if an artist was regional, was that I would bring a mobile rig to their house that had everything in it, which is a microphone and a compressor and a pre and the DAW and a computer, wow. The whole entire self-contained rig, and then, wear a mask, set it up in their house, show them how to use it, and then we would kind of produce the thing together. Now, that's not necessarily entirely relevant to everyone or practical in the sense of like, okay, you have to have a spare portable rig. That sounds good, number one. And number two, sort of the ability and desire to kind of go to someone's house or whatever to sort of set the thing up. But for me, I had like 8 projects that I was working on. All of them were stalled at the vocal part, right? I can make tracks at my studio. I can kind of play instruments, do all this stuff. How am I going to get a good vocal? And how am I going to ensure that the quality is good? So in me bringing this rig over to, people's homes, as long as it's within maybe a couple of hours of where I am, I was willing to do that. And it really sort of allowed me to kind of like continue working and get to the mix phase and so on and so forth. So that was generally the theme and how I tried to overcome an obstacle.
Right. And did you find that there were there were a lot of variables in terms of educating your clients on how to use the rig? Could that be a bottleneck, or do they tend to be pretty receptive?
Yeah, well, I think receptive for sure. And, the bottleneck, there wasn't really much, because I think anyone who I'd be working with would sort of likely, number one, be interested in the same way that I am in the outcome of the thing. And there's not that many variables really, like there are, and it's not to diminish the engineering part, but like I was able to do the engineering remotely, because I'd say, hey, just, point your laptop toward the compressor, and I kind of want to see what's going on. And then I was like, hey, will you just sing a little bit and change the release for me, or change this? So I was able to kind of do the higher caliber engineering and sort of like the gain setting and all of that stuff. All they had to do was have the ability of turning it on and then just doing a little bit of like the most basic Pro Tools, sort of like record and stop and sort of put it back to where you started. And then aside from that, it worked. Keep in mind, too, that the newest part of this wasn't in the article, but like of this process is the remote desktop thing with TeamViewer that I've been doing. This changes everything. Like ostensibly, I could be recording, the thing for them and operating that computer. So it's bananas, man. They're
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And earlier, Kerry, I believe it was you that was talking about like just looking ahead, like how long is it going to be this way? And it makes me think to ask you, Scott, in the process of devising these solutions, if we look ahead to when you won't have to do that anymore, how has this process maybe made you a better engineer and going to contribute to what you can do when you're back together with your clients in the studio? Is it going to open up some new possibilities, turbocharge you?
I mean, I think honestly that's actually the most interesting of all the interesting questions you've had today, because it's sort of like we will get to a point where the virus won't be a thing, right? And so all of these workarounds and all of these new sort of like methods that we've used, it's like what's going to stick around and why. And I think that from my own point of view, and I assume a lot of others, there have been a lot of great things to come out of this. First of all, you're cutting down on travel times and the environmental things by just having people not have to get in a car or any kind of transportation, and the time issue of commuting. Like there are a lot of parts of this process where a person doesn't have to be sitting right next to you, in your place of work. So I think that's really cool. And then I think just the ability, when I think of kind of tracking, I work with, say a guitarist a lot. If that person has a great home setup, right, and we've sort of like worked it out, and I'm happy with the sounds and this and that, it's really a pretty great way to work. They're comfortable. They've got all of their, instead of kind of like, hey Scott, which pedal should I bring over, in my guitar rig, and which guitar? Oh yeah, bring the Strat and the Tele, whatever it is. Like they've got all of their guitars there, and they've got, I broke a string. They've got this. So it's something that's sort of a great benefit of each person being in their most comfortable environment. And of course, we all understand that you do lose things in not having the person in the same room, but like there's stuff to be gained. So to answer your question, I would think there are a number of things in these workarounds and new methods that I will continue to use going forward as we kind of get past the virus stage. And then there'll be other things. I tend to be, despite what you may think listening to this, a very analog kind of Luddite person. So I'm very excited to return to like people getting together and being in the same room.
Oh, I don't think there's anyone watching this who's going to disagree with that. Yeah. That's the conversation I'm constantly having. Guys, we're getting close. I have a couple more questions that I want to get to. Dan, when we were talking the other day, you made me want to ask about practical tips that you've learned through hard experience that you want to let viewers know. You gave me a great example of recording like to an Instagram feed, for example, and what you know about that you want to express to people.
Sure. So one thing that I unfortunately learned through experience, when we deal with like live streaming, whether it's through Instagram, YouTube, even like Zoom calls, things like that, some protocol or some platforms will only read the first input from an interface or from a mixer or something. So let's say you are, you get your band together or something, you're good friends, you all get together or whatever, and you want to perform on YouTube. I would try to stay away from an interface, and I would get a mixer, because a USB mixer is going to take all the inputs and sum them to just a stereo output and then go to the computer from there. So if whatever program platform you're using is only reading the first input, you're still getting the entire band. Versus if you have an interface with 8 inputs, you plug everything in, you might only be getting the vocal. It's only going to read the first input. So I think that is starting to change a little bit as, again, COVID has accelerated a lot of this. But that's something to keep in mind too. I mean, again, if you're just you're just a singer and you want to live stream, it's probably not much of an issue. But if you do have multiple inputs, that's something to keep in mind as well, or podcasting or something like that. Just keep that in mind too.
Yeah, that's a terrific tip. Kerry, does that bring anything to mind for you?
Well, I just really kind of like appreciate the positivity that both of you all are exuding.
How about you, Scott?
You know, again, as someone who's not incredibly technically adept, like I'm happy that just through speaking with friends, people like all of you guys, finding solutions to problems. I really like finding solutions to problems, and the fact that the solutions to all of the problems that we've been talking about from my end were technical is just mind blowing to me. But like it's sort of like like if I could go back and talk to myself from a year ago, see like Scott, that the salvation of this thing for you is going to be in a plugin. I'd be like, get out of town. But I'm really happy that it worked that way. So
that's great. Yeah, and I'm certain I can tell you that from where I sit, people are talking to me constantly about solutions that they've got that they're trying to put together in all sorts of ways, whether we're talking about plugins or solving the latency issues so that people can record remotely together from different studios. And I'm hearing from a lot of people, they're like, Dave, is anyone doing this? Is anyone else doing this? Am I the first person to think of this?
Right.
And all I can ever say is I don't know. You're the first person who's talked to me about it. But the point is that people are coming up with lots of ideas. And if you come up with a workaround, it might be original and it might be something that someone else uses. But fortunately, again, this is another benefit of our online world, is that people can share it, and they absolutely do. One thing that's come through, but we're having the luxury of talking to each other here live in real time and solving these things. And this reminds me of another thing that came to mind when I was speaking with you, Dan, just about the value of speaking with a professional such as yourself when you're equipping your studio and trying to solve these problems, because a lot of audio people are very self-motivated and only want to figure it out completely for themselves and do all the research and be completely self-sufficient. But I can see that there's a value of talking with someone and talking these things through. And from where you sit, how have you seen that that's important?
I definitely agree with that. I think that is important. And I'm very much one of those people that like to figure everything out myself, a lot of times to my own detriment. But, I think just talking to someone, whether it's, a friend who also is in audio, your colleagues, or, somebody like here at B&H, like we have done these a lot, and just bouncing ideas off of each other. The YouTube and internet and everything, forums have a lot of great, incredible information. But sometimes, when you're typing things back and forth to people, things get lost, or you don't mention something or whatever. And being able to have a conversation with somebody brings a lot of that out. And what may work for one person might not work for you. So, you can have a conversation and talk about, hey, what are you using this for? What's your room like? And what are your specific needs? Not what are your needs in relation to this other person's needs, but what are your needs? And let's figure out what's best for you. So I think that is pretty important.
Right. Yeah. And I got the impression you wind up learning some pretty interesting things and processes from talking to your customers. It's not a one-way street.
Exactly. Yeah. I learn a lot from my customers.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, I just want to ask one last question to everybody. In a way, we've been talking about this the entire time. It's come through again and again, but I'm interested to find out what everyone thinks about how remote audio production is going to continue to evolve. What's next, and how do our viewers use these trends to their advantage?
I feel like I think quality is just going to keep getting better and better. Like I said, Zoom recently did like a professional mode kind of thing, and I think a lot of things are going to gear towards better quality, less latency, and ease of use, I think, too. A lot of platforms are easy enough, like Zoom, Skype, whatever, to get on and have a voice chat or something, video chat. But as far as getting a whole music setup going, isn't always the easiest. So I think companies might start looking at ways to make everything a little bit easier, more efficient. That's kind of where I see it going.
Right. Yeah. I think those are all important touch points. And again, we seem to have the brightest minds working on these problems. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Sure. Like I agree again with Dan and what he said. I think technology, it's not the kind of thing that as the years go by, the technology gets worse. It gets better, for the most part, and our use of it can get better too. And so all of these things, which I view, like when we talk about sort of like the lack of vibe because of technical issues on Zoom, and like I think that will bandwidth increases, and the thing, and Dan, you were mentioning before that the audio can increase too, and they're looking into that. I think that will make the process better. And no one would have pictured all this stuff if you asked a year ago, and so it's just one of those things. I think that people's minds have been opened up. Any professional in this realm is sort of thinking things that they weren't before about how to do stuff, and I think that a number of the limitations have been removed. It's like, okay, if I need to track a band, it has to happen like this, but like there's a lot of different ways to do stuff, and I think that these, like other things in life, when you have these kind of difficult moments, like there's some cool things that come out of it. So I'm curious to see, what direction this goes in. But it also, as I mentioned before, it's also kind of the whole thing just leaves us all craving, sort of real interactions with people, and the sort of magic that happens when you get, 4 people in a room playing together, and so there's both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Kerry, that makes me want to be a fly on the wall on those sessions you're doing out in the country.
Agree, but I think that even just if we're not working together, that the challenges kind of will just push the art in a different way, and push the technology too. So
yes, yeah. I see that, and I've certainly, in my experience of all this, observed the plasticity of my own mind, and how my perceptions are changing. There are people that I work on certain projects with now that I've only worked with remotely, and I've kind of forgotten that I've never met them in person. and I realize that from time to time that I've never been in the room with them, and I'm kind of forgetting about that. But of course, were that to happen, that would be pretty cool, and I look forward to those things as well. Well, guys, this has been a really insightful conversation about remote audio production. I want to thank all of you for taking part. Is there anything anyone else wants to add that we haven't covered yet?
Don't think so.
No.
All right. Okay. Well, it's been good. Anyone who's watching this, please add anything you've learned in the comments section, and where you want to point us. Let's keep the conversation going. I want to thank B&H one more time for making this panel possible. I had so much fun being together with all of you. Group hug. All right, group hug. We're making it happen. All right. Thank you, everyone out there in MixCon land. Mix, record, do everything safe virtually, and we will see you soon. Take care.